Welcome to the Clarington Chronicle Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Stanish. This is podcast episode number 79 for Thursday, March 23rd, 2017. I'm glad to have you join me. In this podcast, I'm going to take a look at Clarington's sign bylaw. Well, once again, I hope everybody had a fantastic week. The weather was a bit up and down, but I think we're definitely getting into some better weather coming up, although the last 2 days have been pretty cold. So I got a couple of news items here before we get into our main topic. The first one I want to bring to your attention is a story in the local paper about the former Target store in Bowmanville possibly becoming a Lowe's. So the story here has Clarington residents can have their say on plans to redevelop Bowmanville's former Target store at an upcoming meeting. Valiant Property Management has submitted an application to turn the vacant Target store on Highway 2 in Bowmanville, so that's on the south side there, into a Lowe's store. It continues on here. The proposal would involve demolishing the building that houses Hakim Optical and Payless Shoes to create a customer loading area. So you're going to be able to offer feedback at a public meeting, which is planned for April 3rd at 7 p.m. at the town hall. And the second story I wanted to bring to your attention is a program called Trees for Rural Roads. So this has been going on for a while in an attempt to sort of beautify our community. But I just wanted to bring this to your attention because there is a deadline coming up. So the weather is, this is off the Clarington.net site, and it says the weather is finally warmed up and it's time to think about tree planting. Trees for Rural Roads applications are due by March 31st, 2017. So you got about a week to get those in. The Trees for Rural Roads program offers trees free of charge to Clarington rural residents to be planted along municipal roadways that border private land. Participants have their choice of a number of native tree species. And the press release here from the town goes on, the program, established in 2012, is delivered in partnership with Central Lake Ontario Region Conservation Authority and Ganaraska Region Conservation Authorities. Benefits of the program not only include increased tree canopy cover and wildlife habitat, but also climate change mitigation, local history preservation, and community engagement through volunteerism. In essence, the Trees for Rural Roads program benefits the local environment, community, and the economy. So I'm going to put a link below, and if you do have a rural property, I'd strongly encourage you to take advantage of this program. Okay, so let's get on to our main topic, which is going to be on the sign bylaws in Clarington. So I first got onto this topic from a discussion on a forum on Facebook in the South Curtis neighborhood group. And somebody had posted a discussion about warning people about the, with winter ending, we're going to start seeing a lot of those signs, the little bag signs, advertising roofers and all sorts of different services on almost every intersection, it seems, right, and along main straightaways on public property. So he was concerned about that, and the discussion got, pretty lively. A lot of people chimed in, many people who didn't like the sign, some people who thought, well, this is the only way to advertise, and that kind of thing. So I thought I might take a look at that and what the bylaw kind of is, and a little bit of a look at that, and then sort of the pros and cons of these kind of signs, and a couple of thoughts on where I stand on that. So I encourage you to answer the question of the podcast and participate as well, and share your thoughts on those bag signs and sort of how Clarington deals with them. Okay, so here's first of all, if you link to the Clarington.net site, you'll find sign permits. There's a section called sign permits. So here's what it says: if you plan to erect a sign in Clarington, you must fill out and submit a sign permit application form. This is required for both permanent and temporary signs. So these bag ones would be the temporary ones. And by bag, I mean the little metal frame, and they put a plastic bag which has some advertising on it. Your sign, it says here, must comply with the sign bylaw. And if you click on that, you'll find out that the sign bylaw is 44 pages long. So you're expected to kind of follow those rules. Now that applies to permanent signs and temporary signs. So most of it's about permanent signs, but there is sections on temporary signs. You also have to adhere to the building bylaw and zoning bylaw. So then there's an application form that you can click. And then how do I apply? Bring your completed application form, including written authorization of the property owner to install the sign. So that's mostly not the signs we're talking about, to the planning services department. Also bring 2 copies of plans or drawings showing the location, size, type, and precise wording and or illustrations of your sign. And you bring the application fee. And that fee is listed below. The fee for a sign permit is $180 for a permanent sign and $90 for a temporary sign. In some cases, other fees may apply. So it's a pretty steep rate there. Okay, so how are we going to consider this? So first, let's look at some of the pros of having a bylaw like this. So one pro is that it beautifies the town. I think the main complaint with these signs tends to center around, it makes the community look like an eyesore. You have ads all over the place. Everywhere you look, there's a sign for a roofer or some sort of service, plumbing or whatever. When you could be looking at a field or you could be looking at grass, you're looking at a bunch of signs. So I think the main pro for I'm listing this in the pro category of this bylaw, is that it tends to beautify the town. A second pro for having this kind of bylaw is that it brings in revenue for the municipality. As you can see, if you look at all the signs that all the different companies have, all the different buildings, all the different companies around us, they're paying quite a bit for these signs, just for the ability to have a sign, to put out your shingle for the service that you offer or your company. So it brings in revenue for the municipality. I think one of the other big advantages of having a sign bylaw is it ensures that the town doesn't get overrun, by inappropriate signs, for one thing. So we don't want, people advertising services for things we might find inappropriate in the community, or too many signs. So with a bylaw in place, you can see that you can't have like sequential signs or hundreds of signs in a row and that kind of thing. So our community doesn't look like it's just a big advertising block, that we actually have a neighborhood here. I think another advantage is that it also makes it easier for staff to maintain the boulevards. So this isn't so much an issue in the winter, but as this person who originally started this idea came up with, as winter ends and we go into summer, we're going to need to mow those boulevards, the town will, and it becomes a problem when you have to stop the machine and remove these signs and put them aside and maybe put them back, but it just slows everything down, which increases the workload for the staff, which also increases the costs for the municipality, which increases our taxes. So, there is a direct cost for this. It might be incremental, might be only, it only takes a few seconds to jump out of his machine, but you start adding up all these 2 seconds, it starts adding into hours, right? And hours turn into days, which turns into a lot of money. Now, another pro, as far as I can see here, is it helps safety. One of the big problems that I have with these signs are that it blocks intersections. Now, when I was running for election, I ran in 2010 and I ran in 2014 in Curtis, and there were strict bylaws concerning a sort of triangulation around an intersection, so you couldn't block the view of a car that was at an intersection, so you could have a fair shot at looking to see if there was oncoming traffic. Now, in my mind, although that's a pro for the bylaw, I do think that cars are a bigger issue. Like, I have many intersections around here that, I come to the intersection, I can't see what's going on down the road because there's cars that are either in their driveway, which could be legal, but sort of on the boulevard part of the driveway, or parked right on the street, and I can't see what's going on. I got to pull halfway into the intersection before I can even see where I'm going. But so that's kind of a different issue, but it's kind of related to this as well. So that's why I'm mentioning it. I think that's kind of a bigger issue, but definitely there's a safety issue concerned with these signs being located, plonked right at the corner of an intersection. You can't see where you're going. It's a hazard. There's lots of children in our community. We're a young, vibrant community, so that's definitely a hazard. Okay, so some of the cons of the bylaw, though. Okay, so in my mind, it kind of smacks of a police state. That's a little bit harsh, I think, but it has that sense that, my God, are we not over-regulated here? You can't even put a sign out, and bylaw officers coming by and handing you a ticket, right? So it just has that. Having a 44-page sign bylaw just kind of smacks of over-lawyerization. Like, obviously lawyers are involved here somewhere because somebody's written out dozens and dozens of pages here over something simple as a sign. You just want to put out a sign, right? So I realize that there's technicalities and I realize there's logical conundrums and all this kind of stuff, but I think the average person is just like, is that reasonable or not reasonable? Did the guy put 400 signs in a row? Unreasonable. Or did he put couple signs out. He's got a little business on the side. So I think in one sense that it smacks a little bit of a police state to go to that. Everything is regulated down to the exact percentage and down to the exact angle of sign and everything. Like it just smacks of you guys are overdoing it. So now another con, I think, is that it's hard to enforce, okay? So now I've mentioned that I ran in the last 2 elections, and I had people running against me that ran right over this bylaw, okay? They were posting, they were putting up a dozen signs in one intersection all over the community. From their perspective, it looked great. Their pictures were everywhere. Signs were everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing this guy's face, right? But it was against the bylaw. And I was calling the municipality daily saying, look, I'm sticking to the bylaw here. I spaced my signs out. I drove with the trip meter, and I was marking them off every half kilometer exactly. I was spacing out my sign. I was just getting blown away. So, you know what I mean? So it's a hard to enforce kind of bylaw. If somebody comes from Oshawa and puts up a sign in Clarington, how can we stop them, right? Like, sure, we may end up having a municipal bylaw enforcement officer come by, grab the sign, but she can't spend all day doing that, right? Because that creates another thing. If they're just constantly picking them up, where they're going to put them, having put up those signs, it takes quite a while, so it becomes a big issue. So it's just a hard to enforce kind of bylaw. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have it. Doesn't mean there's pros to it, but I'm just saying it is hard to enforce. It's kind of a hard to enforce bylaw. So further to that point, if you do get rid of all the signs off public property like that, it reinforces the power of incumbents. So candidates who already have their name out there, businesses who already have their name out there, have a huge advantage, right? So it's hard for the little guy, it's hard for the new guy to kind of get in on that territory, right? And generally speaking, I think most people who see a sign like that know that it's a newcomer, right? It's not a business. You're not dealing with Home Depot. You're dealing with somebody who has a smaller business, right? And as they get successful, that they're going to expand into sort of a different advertising model, right? This is somebody trying to get their foot in the door. I think we're all aware of that. So to my next point on the cons, this kind of is aimed at small business, right? So having an overly restrictive sign bylaw, particularly with these little bag signs, in my mind, hampers small business. It's an anti-small business sort of bylaw. Now that's debatable, right? You may think that there has to be a level playing field. We can't have Home Depot putting these signs out all over the place, competing against Phil's Tools or whatever, or just some random guy who puts up a sign. But again, these things are expensive, right? Like signs themselves are expensive. If this person if this person gets to any level of success, they're going to move on to something else. So I definitely agree there shouldn't be a whole lot of them. You can't have 400 different companies advertising in this way, but you generally don't. If we leave things as they were, I think most people are not aware too much of this sign bylaw. I think they're aware that there is a sign bylaw, but I think the understanding is that it's not really enforced. So if we have this sort of laissez-faire attitude at this point, except for egregious kind of examples, it's like a live and let live situation, right? So, I do think though that this really a sign bylaw like this really hampers the small business owner, somebody who's trying to get their foot in the door, who has a little business that they're trying to develop. So, you may disagree, but I just think that it is kind of a little bit of a small business anti-development. Now, this also damages this is related. This damages small nonprofits. They operate on very thin margins. These are groups that operate on donations. They fundraise. They do all sorts of little things for the community, but they have very limited funds. So $90 is a lot for something like a Lions Club or Knights of Columbus or whatever. That's a lot of money for them, and it's for them to shoulder that kind of fee and go through this whole procedure takes away from what they're doing for the community, right? So a related issue though is that if you start opening it up to exemptions, well, we're going to let the Lions have a few times a year they can put out their things, plus the Knights of Columbus, plus the Rotary Club, plus what I mean. What do you do about the softball club then? What do you do about the soccer club? What do you do about every group has an argument why they have something positive to give to the community, right? Like it's like an argument as to what they provide for the community. So it starts opening up favoritism from the municipality. Why this group and not that group? Why this service, not that service, right? So you'd want to be kind of all in or all out. So it's just a con, I think, for one of these sign bylaws that it's a hard burden for some of these community groups to shoulder, and a lot of these signs during the year are for things like I'm thinking, for example, of the Orono fair that comes by in September, which is fantastic. If you've never been, you should go. But they put their signs up, and I'm sure they've done it properly. I'm sure they've put up, got the temporary sign fee paid and all that. But but the point is that for some smaller groups, that's an onerous kind of fee. It's difficult for them to raise that money, and it really takes away from the effort they put in. So it's a difficult situation. The other thing is, another con is that it could start the rise of vigilantes. Like in this Curtis group that I was talking about, all of a sudden there was a talk about taking things down, and I'm going to take some of these down, right? I drove out today, I didn't see any along Bloor Street, and I saw one sign today, and it was for a roofing company. But and that was outside, and that was on the boulevard near my home. And again, I've seen the odd sign pop up, and then I've seen them go down, and I don't know if the city took them down, or vigilantes, or the person just move their sign. So, but I didn't think it was egregious. It didn't really bother me. It wasn't. I saw it was a small business owner. I've looked at those signs myself when I've needed roofing and that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure that's how I got my roofer. Is that I saw a sign, or my neighbor or something put a sign out front, and that's how I kind of saw it. But usually, they'll do a roof, they'll put a few signs in the neighborhood, and then a week later, all those signs are gone, right? So I don't see it as a big issue like that. So that goes on. So this segues into my thoughts on the issue. So my first thought is that I wish people would spend as much time helping the community as opposing things in their community. So yes, let's say you're opposed to these signs. You want mainly on the sort of point that you want to beautify the community. Well, then why don't you spend more time beautifying your community than opposing sort of things that are sort of like small business or things that other people are doing. And I know that's a difficult argument. It's, you could be arguing that I think I'm doing that by doing this, right? But you're kind of raining on somebody else's parade. There's other things you can do in the community to make it better and look better. I'm thinking of, for example, perhaps join a municipal club that does things like a horticultural society or something that does something that beautifies your community in some way, rather than kind of raining on what somebody else is doing. So that's kind of my first thought. Now, I'm not actually opposed to the signs, right? As long as they're not a visual hazard. I'm also not opposed to the bylaw. So I think having some rules, as I pointed out at the beginning, is important. I think it's important for us to kind of come to an understanding, how many, where these signs should be. I think it's a good thing. But again, it can become a little onerous on small business and aimed at really just kind of slowing down guys or women trying to get their foot in the door, right? So I think we don't want that kind of attitude. We want to have an entrepreneurial kind of spirit in the community. So I'm not you get the proverbial we're trying to legislate the lemonade stand out of business, right? And I kind of get that sense with these signs. They're kind of like experiments by people, they're attempts by people, and frankly, this might be the last attempt this guy has in him to try and make something of himself, right? So I'm just saying, I'm not really opposed to somebody trying something. It doesn't bother me to that extent. It may bother other people, but it doesn't bother me to that extent. And just the final thought I have is do we really have nothing better to do than harp on these signs? Yes, they pop up from time to time. Yes, they kind of get out of control in some intersections at time to time. But, I think if the city sees it as a problem, they can take them down. As long as they're not creating a visual hazard at intersections, I think it's okay. As long as they're not too many in one spot, I think it's kind of okay. The odd one pops up. They're around for a while. Somebody takes them. The city takes them. The person, has advertised in that area as much as they're going, and they leave. And so in the end, I think my feeling is the stalemate we have is pretty good. The city kind of lets it go for a little bit until it becomes ridiculous, and then I guess they take it down. I think that's kind of a good compromise. I think the situation we have right now is pretty good. I'd probably like to see a fewer signs. But if there were a few more, it wouldn't be the end of my world either. So in the end, I think if it helps promote a little bit of small business in the area, I have no real opposition to it. So I'm curious to think, to see what you have to think, and please answer the question of the podcast. Question of the podcast: is Clarington's sign bylaw enforced too much, too little, or about right? Is Clarington's sign bylaw enforced too much, too little, or just about right? And that's it for episode number 79 of the Clarington Chronicle Podcast. If you'd like to comment on the podcast or have an idea for an upcoming episode, please email me at claringtonchronicle@gmail.com. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Clarington Chron or on one of the Facebook pages dedicated to Clarington or communities within Clarington, or on my website, markstanish.com. You can subscribe for free on iTunes or Android and get instant updates when a new podcast is uploaded. Thank you for listening.